Your Eminences, Your Excellency, Reverend Fathers, Reverend Sisters, dear friends, it is a privilege and an honor for me to address these words to you today, especially as I consider that one of the very important missions of Acn is to be a voice for the voiceless Christians who are persecuted in so many parts of the world. In the first 40 years of the existence of Acn, our main focus was in doing everything we could to help those Christians who were being persecuted by communism in Eastern Europe, in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It was a huge task and sometimes very dangerous when Bibles or money were being smuggled in to help our suffering brothers and sisters in faith. With the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the defeat of communism in most of the countries in Eastern Europe, where it had reigned for decades, Acn then started to focus on helping the church in Eastern Europe to come up out of the ashes. While communism was falling apart in some parts of the world already in the 1980s, elsewhere, a radical form of Islam was emerging. For Acn, it soon became clear that Christians in many parts of the Middle East were being seriously threatened by militant Islam, and that we had to do everything we could with the help of our benefactors to support these Christians, both spiritually and materially, and to give them a voice and keep their presence in these countries. Sadly, today, this persecution has spread to many countries in the Sahel zone, as His Eminence mentioned, and other regions of Africa. In this presentation, I would like to focus on 5 countries out of many where Christians face persecution by extremist Muslims today: Iraq, Syria, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso. Iraq. One of the Muslim majority countries with the oldest history of a religious presence is Iraq. Acn was already supporting the church in Iraq in 1972. Even at that time, the oppression of Christians, above all in northern Iraq, was the reason for our aid there. After the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003, the situation for Christians deteriorated rapidly. They became the target of Islamists. Many were kidnapped or murdered, and we speak of modern-day martyrs. Quite a number of them are Iraqis. The result was the beginning of a huge exodus of Christians from Iraq. It is estimated that before 2003, there were around 1.3 million Christians living there. Today, there are perhaps 150,000. Nobody knows the exact figures. In the summer of 2014 came one of the worst moments in the history of Iraqi Christians when the Islamic State, or ISIS, invaded the Nineveh Plain, the traditional home of the Christians since Christianity arrived almost 2,000 years before. Overnight, some 100,000 Christians fled to the safer region of Kurdistan. Just days after the Christians arrived in Erbil, the main city of Kurdistan, Acn was there. I will never forget the scene that awaited us. Families were camped in the garden of Archbishop Warda, the Chaldean Archbishop of Erbil, or sleeping on mats on the floor of parish halls. Young and old alike looked shell-shocked. Elderly women who had never left their village before looked at us in bewilderment, not understanding what had happened to them. We were accompanied by Archbishop Nuna, the Chaldean Archbishop of Mosul, who himself had become a refugee and later became the shepherd of his flock in Australia. Acn immediately mobilized resources to provide emergency shelter, food, medical aid, schooling, pastoral attention, and support priests and religious themselves displaced. We also helped the church to fund new convents for communities of religious sisters who had been forced to flee, as well as ongoing support to the local church to be able to sustain itself and provide for the spiritual needs of its flock. By the end of 2017, Acn was supporting 95,000 refugees from the Nineveh Plains. Between August 2016 and July 2017, Iraq was liberated from ISIS rule, but they left destruction behind. Following the defeat of ISIS, we launched our Return to the Roots campaign, aimed to support displaced Christians and church structures in several towns and villages in the Nineveh Plains after the war in Iraq ended. Acn was moved to action by the fundamental right and hope of these Christians to live in their own ancestral homeland. Furthermore, we are firmly convinced of the importance of the Christian presence as promoters of peace and reconciliation in the region. In the words of Pietro Cardinal Parolin, here in Iraq, Christians have a special vocation to be artisans for peace, reconciliation, and development. The return of Christians to their homes was of high urgency. If they did not return soon after the war, then it was clear that others were going to occupy their homes. The Iraqi government was not willing to protect empty houses. In the end, about 50% of those Christians who had fled their homes in the Nineveh Plain returned. In total, Acn facilitated 5,000 house renovations. Acn then went on to rebuild desecrated churches, destroyed convents, kindergartens, priests' houses. By 2024, 10 years after the ISIS invasion, our benefactors had helped us to give over 56 million euros in project aid for the Christians in Iraq. Today, we support pastoral programs and summer camps for the youth, and one of the most promising projects, scholarships for Christian students at the Catholic University of Erbil. The university is the key structure to keeping Christianity in Iraq and provides many platforms for building bridges of understanding with communities that have suffered religious discrimination and prejudice. In 2024, Acn provided around 1.6 million euros in funding for projects in Iraq. Syria. The Christians in Syria have been walking at Calvary since the beginning of the war in 2011, and even now the road ahead for them is still not clear. Before the war, although they lived in a socialist country, the Christians had a lot of freedom, especially to practice their faith. They were well educated. Many of them were doctors, engineers, or other professionals. Their presence was appreciated by their Muslim fellow citizens, but the war put an end to their stable life. As in Iraq, the number of Christians in Syria has diminished greatly. Before the war in 2011, an estimated 2.1 million Christians, 10% of the population, lived in Syria. Today, there are perhaps 300,000, or 2% of the population. Those Christians who could left in the early years of the conflict, and the Christians who stayed are mainly the elderly, the sick, and mothers with children. Many of the men left to avoid being drafted into the Syrian army. But worse still was the fact that those Christians still living in Syria became targets of the Islamic State that came in from Iraq. Many were kidnapped, killed, or told to convert to Islam or leave. In the first years of the Syrian war that started in 2011, when it was a matter of sheer survival, Acn was able to save tens of thousands of Christians with emergency aid projects that included medical care, food packets, powdered milk for infants, and rent for housing for the displaced from Aleppo or Homs. In Aleppo, a committee of some 9 Catholic and Orthodox bishops worked together with Acn to find ways to help their faithful. But despite the recent, more or less, end of military operations in Syria, the country is now affected by an even more extreme economic crisis and roaring inflation. One project partner in Syria estimates that a family needs $200 to live in dignity each month, while the minimum salary is now between $20 and $30. Electricity is rare in Syria, between 0 and 4 hours, depending on the day and the location. Many families struggle and are largely dependent on the church to survive. On November the 27th, 2024, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, forces started moving towards Aleppo. And within 10 days, on September the 8th, the Assad regime unexpectedly fell. This sudden change of power left many in Syria, especially the Christian community, uncertain about what would come next. The future of Christians in Syria remains a question mark, with many fearing the possible rise of a more extreme Islam. Archbishop Jacques Mourad, Syriac Catholic Archbishop of Homs, recently spoke with Acn about the current situation in Syria. He explained that although the government has made many conciliatory gestures towards the Christian community and other religious minorities, the presence in the streets of bearded and heavily armed Salafist militias leaves many uneasy. He told us that this rigid interpretation of Islam is foreign to Syria's tradition of diversity. He said, in the history of Syria, there has never been only one religion. This is a place of encounter. According to Archbishop Mourad, even many Sunni Muslims, the majority religion in Syria, are suspicious of the militants who roam the streets. He said, our Sunni neighbors tell us that they are not happy with this new regime, and they say so to others. But amongst themselves there is fear, because for the Salafists, if the Sunnis are not on the same page, they are considered blasphemers, and the consequence for blasphemy is death. Despite the difficulties, he remains hopeful. He said, we feel a responsibility for building a future for our country. We want to participate and share in it. Regarding the specific needs of Christians, he points to the construction of houses, hospitals, and schools. He said, I think that the church has to take part in this, and the best way is to organize and support big projects which will be able to give Christians jobs, work, and courage. We have to help young Christians who want to get married to sustain and encourage families, to support hospitals and schools for the Christian communities, and to encourage those who left to come back, because if they see opportunities for work, it might encourage them to return. Despite the uncertainty around the future of the country, Acn remains firmly committed to helping the Christians in Syria and is even open to expand, since needs are still significant among the Christian community, as many have lost their jobs and are cash-strapped. One of our significant projects of hope is providing Christians in Aleppo, Homs, and Damascus with microcredits in order that they can start again to stand on their own 2 feet. Archbishop Murad's own experience as a former ISIS captive for 7 months in 2015 gave him strength. He said, "For somebody like me who has experienced interior freedom because of my captivity, there is nothing now that imprisons me. My life is in the hands of God. He is guiding me. The one who has done this miracle for me and given me the miracle of returning me to freedom remains at my side. I see this for myself and for everyone, including for the presence of the Christians and the church in Syria." Acn's projects in Syria since 2011 have been founded on the desire to help the Christians survive and also to stay, because this is their homeland, and Syria would be so much poorer without their Christian testimony. In 2024, Acn provided almost €5 million in funding for projects in Syria. Pakistan. Of all the countries that I have ever visited during my 45 years with Acn, Pakistan is the country where I've seen the worst and most degrading treatment of Christians by Muslims. There is a huge instrumentalization of the population by some radical Muslim leaders who incite fanatism. The use of social media has increased the radicalization of mobs. Pakistan is a majority Muslim country. 96.4% of the more than 208 million inhabitants are Muslims. Hindus make up 1.3%, and Christians some 1.9%. Catholics are around 1.3 million, or less than 1%. Most Christians are very poor, living from day to day. Muslims refer to them as sweepers, as in the cities and towns, many of them sweep the roads for a living, or worse still, they call them dogs. They face great discrimination and even persecution. During the COVID pandemic, the Christians benefit from very little state support, unlike their Muslim neighbors. It was same during horrific floods in the south of Pakistan in 2022. It is only thanks to the work of the Catholic Church that many of the Christians could survive. Young Christian and Hindu girls are often kidnapped, forced to marry a Muslim, and to convert to Islam. Generally, when their parents try to rescue them, they face a non-supportive legal system. One of the gravest threats comes from the country's anti-blasphemy laws. Though intended to protect all religions, these laws are frequently used to target religious minorities. While Muslims make up the majority of those accused, Christians and other minorities are disproportionately affected. Accusations often result in mob violence, arrests without evidence, and even death. Acn has supported and continues to support the Justice and Peace Commission of the Pakistan Bishops' Conference, which works tirelessly to defend Christians accused under these laws and to rescue young Christian and Hindu girls who have been abducted, forced into marriage, and coerced into converting to Islam. On one of my visits to Pakistan, I met Yusuf, a middle-aged Christian. He was illiterate and earned a living for himself and his family as a daily wage farm laborer. On a good day, he would earn $1. And he was a victim of the very flawed anti-blasphemy law. When I met Yusuf, he had just been released after 3 months in prison. And his story is not untypical. He had been playing cards with his Muslim neighbors and had been winning. A fight broke out. Someone falsely accused him of burning pages of the Quran, and he ran for his life, as he knew what the consequences would be. To protect his family, he finally gave himself up to the police, and thus followed 3 months of torture. Several times he was told that if he converted to Islam, his life would be spared, but he did not give in. Finally, he was released, thanks to the Bishops' Conference. When I asked him, why did he not give in to the torture and fear, he simply looked at the crucifix on the wall behind me and said, "But he, Christ, suffered so much more." I was humbled by these words, and I heard them several times during my visits to Pakistan from Christians who had suffered persecution or discrimination. Yusuf was released from prison, but his life had been turned upside down. He and his family had to leave the village for a more anonymous life in the city, where he most probably would become a sweeper. In response to such realities, initiatives focusing on youth engagement and catechist formation funded by Acn play a pivotal role in strengthening the faith community, fostering a deeper connection to the Church to ensure its sustainability and future growth in Pakistan, despite the hostile environment. In 2024, Acn provided almost $2.2 million in funding to the Church in Pakistan. Now we turn to Africa. Nigeria. Nigeria is a religiously diverse country, although almost evenly split between Christians and Muslims. Christians make up just under half the population, with about 12 to 14% being Catholic. Most Muslims, who make up around 46%, are Sunni. Traditional African religions account for the remaining 7%. The country is geographically divided. Christianity dominates in the south, while Islam is strongest in the north. The current situation in Nigeria has created great tensions and made the nation politically polarized. Decisions, statements, and appointments of political leaders make many Nigerians question the unity of the country. Nigeria's constitution recognizes the principle of the federal character, which means that all the country's sectors must be represented in the administration of federal institutions. However, this is not the case. One of the biggest concerns in the country is the concentration of political and military power in the hands of Muslims, and particularly in the same ethnic family, the Hausa Fulani. Non-Muslims in the country often complain that the security sector is run by one religious group and one ethnic group in what is a multi-religious and multi-ethnic nation. Christians in the north of the country speak of systemic and deeply rooted discrimination based on religion. The Archbishop of Kaduna in the north of the country, His Excellency Matthew Manoso Nadagos, told Acn, "Religious persecution in the north is systemic. For you to be able to practice your religion freely, you should be able to preach anywhere. That is not possible in the north. I cannot build a church, yet the government employs and pays imams to teach in schools. Every year they have money to build mosques in the budget, but they will not let you build churches." Under the Constitution, Nigeria has freedom of religion. including the freedom to change religion, to practice alone or in community, in private or in public. Christians should not be bound or forced to follow Islamic law, but in the North, Christians often feel discriminated against by legislation that targets certain social vices and un-Islamic behavior. Some sticking points compiled by Acn during fact-finding trips to northern Nigeria and interviews with local Christians over the past years who claim to feel like second-class citizens are the denial of access to public businesses, political exclusion, fewer job opportunities, lack of promotion in public positions. While teaching Christian religious knowledge is not allowed in public schools, Islamic teachers are employed in all public schools in northern Nigeria. There is abduction and forced marriages of Christians, and Christian churches are not allowed to buy land. In the North, where Sharia law is also applied to Christians, we noted the following. The hijab, a head covering worn by Muslim women, must be worn in all secondary schools by all female students. And traditional Muslim moral standards, hisbah, are often imposed by force, including on non-Muslims. These include forcibly preventing the mixing of sexes on public transport systems and enforcing a dress code, especially on women in educational institutions. His Excellency Ignatius Kaigama is the Archbishop of Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. In statements made to Acn, he explained that the security situation in the whole country is becoming unbearable, and that even in the capital there have been serious problems. Asked if there is anti-Christian persecution by the authorities, he replies, "We cannot generalize by simply saying that Christians are persecuted, because in the governing party there are Christians. But persecution is just not about killing people with knives. It is about manipulating things in favor of one group. There is subtle persecution, which is even more dangerous. It is done in such a way that you cannot say they are really killing Christians. They have not pushed the Christians away. But the way the government carries on, you can be sure that Christians are not favored. There is no equity. We are a country that is more or less 50-50, so there should be equal distribution of resources, of opportunities, and people should feel included in sensitive political, economic, or security positions." Acn has found that there are many reasons and drivers of the conflicts in the north and middle belt of Nigeria and the terrible atrocities mainly against Christians. There is a struggle for power, for political interests, and a lot of corruption. There is a fight for natural resources and a shortage of land due to climatic reasons and population growth. There is the poor social, cultural, and educational condition of the population in northern Nigeria. There are ethnic disputes and tribalism, but also certainly, in some of the conflicts, a jihadist message and a desire to impose a stricter version of Islam. Acn is deeply involved in Nigeria, funding a large number of projects which range from construction or reconstruction of church infrastructure to formation and material support for priests, seminarians, and other pastoral agents. We also support the internally displaced, who now number millions, and we provide four-wheel drive vehicles for priests who are too vulnerable to be kidnapped if they use motorcycles. Some bishops even request extra security measures for the parishes that are more rural. In 2025 and beyond, Acn is planning an extensive program to respond to the needs of the Nigerian church. It will do so along 5 lines. First of all, keeping our project partners safe. Secondly, building peace through interreligious dialogue and formation. Thirdly, caring for the victims of violence. Fourthly, strengthening the church in its outreach. And fifthly, supporting prayer for peace, healing, and forgiveness. In 2024, Acn provided around 2.2 million euros in funding for projects in Nigeria. Finally, I come to Burkina Faso. I just want to add a few words following His Eminence's talk to share what Acn has been doing in Burkina Faso. From the very beginning of the crisis, we've done everything possible to stand by the local church, supporting priests, sisters, catechists, and the many internally displaced people. In the face of massacres and forced displacements, we've worked closely with the Episcopal conferences to respond in a structured and timely way. We have helped build shelters for evacuated priests, provided emergency financial support, like mass stipends and subsistence aid, and funded spiritual and psychological care for those affected by the violence. We know how essential it is to help the church remain a strong and visible presence in society, not only to offer pastoral care, but also to defend human dignity and promote peace through Catholic social teaching. That's why we are committed to long-term support in Burkina Faso, coordinating our response across several areas to meet the complex challenges the church faces there. In 2024, Acn provided around 2.3 million in funding for projects in Burkina Faso. I have spoken a lot about what Acn does in terms of funding projects in these 5 countries, but it is important to mention 2 other important ways we support Christians who are victims of a radicalized Islam. The first one is prayer. With our network of more than 350 benefactors worldwide, including our very loyal supporters here in South Korea, we have a powerhouse of prayer. And so often, when we inform our suffering brothers and sisters that another Catholic thousands of kilometers away is praying for them, it is so encouraging and brings them hope. In grave situations, we even organize a prayer campaign that includes our benefactors and the contemplative religious all over the world. Acn also seeks to be a voice for the voiceless and provides a platform of information about the suffering of Christians and helps local church authorities to speak out at international events, like today, on issues such as religious freedom and Christian persecution. Our advocacy team has taken witnesses from the persecuted church to address politicians, either in the parliaments of our donor countries or in the United Nations and the European Union. It is a work that needs a lot of time and patience, but has proven to be very successful in several instances. Finally, I would like to thank our national section and all our benefactors here in South Korea. You should never underestimate what a difference your spiritual and material support means for our suffering brothers and sisters in faith. Thank you.